Welcome to our Insights in Accounting show with me, Rob Brown, and we have a special guest with us today. It's Lucy Coyne. Good day, Lucy.
Good afternoon, good morning, afternoon it is. Nice
It
to see
is,
you.
and welcome. I usually have this slot with Martin Bissett, and we talk about things we've seen in the news or trends that are happening in the accounting and fintech world that are pertinent to our thousands of listeners all over the world. This is our Tuesday show as part of the Accounting Influencers podcast network with a show going out every day. So it's great to have you with us as a guest commentary, if you like. And what's caught your eye this week, Lucy?
So it's one that we've been chatting about at Mazuma for a couple of weeks actually, but quiet quitting is an article that went around probably last month for the first time. And it's not going away. And it's leading to some very interesting conversations internally about what it looks like. Do we have any staff that are quietly quitting and we've not noticed? And what do we do about it? So I think it's a really interesting form of revolution by employees. And yeah, it's kind of fascinated me. The psychology of it, I find very interesting.
Well, let's start with some basic definitions for people that have been hiding under a rock for a few weeks and are not sure that we're emerging from COVID. We've had the Great Resignation where people start to recalibrate their lives and think, is this worth it? Whatever that is. How would you define quiet quitting in your book, Lucy? What are the commentaries telling us online?
So quiet quitting, I think, is kind of commonly defined as somebody basically, it's a little bit like how the unions used to work to rule. So just doing your basics. So just turning up, doing the hours allocated, doing the bare minimum to not get sacked, but also probably not kind of go above and beyond. And that's it really. So it's a little kind of work to rule. It's a little it's not really transgressive, but it's nitpicky, I suppose I'd describe it as kind of being pedantic about what actually is your job and what isn't, and only doing that is.
Well, you're already starting to use some negative words like nitpicking and pedantic, so we can see what side you fall down on. But this has come about in response to the hustle culture. You've got to be brilliant, you've got to enjoy it, you've got to be passionate, you've got to put in the hours, you've got to go above and beyond, you've got to work late, you've got to do your stuff on the weekends, you've got to give your pound of flesh, and the public is responding to that with this quiet quitting, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting actually you picked up on my language. Yeah, pedantic, nitpicky, they are quite negative words. But I suppose I view it in a negative way because I don't think that quiet quitting is the way to solve the problem. So that's kind of, and I'm all for, look, I'm a very uh disruptive person. I'm
You
all
are.
for I'm all for thanks. I'm all for kind of vive la revolution. But I think that there are more productive ways of doing it. And I'm anti-hustle culture. I don't think it's good for it. I've spoken very openly about my own mental health. I don't think that hustle culture does anyone any favors in terms of kind of keeping good mental health. But likewise, I don't think that almost taking pride in doing the bare minimum is the way out of this. I think that what this is doing is avoiding a rich conversation around cultural expectations between employees and employers. And I feel like when people become, this is almost polarizing it, isn't it? Again, we live in a very polarized world. It's either your hustle culture or you're not, or you're quietly quitting. And there's no middle ground there. And I think what it's doing is we're missing the nuances of that middle ground, which is where that kind of where that value is going to come in for employees and employers.
I don't know if you picked up as well, Lucy, on the narrative that quiet quitting is something speaks to a sense of entitlement in the middle and white collar classes. Because if you're a firefighter, a policeman, a nurse, a teacher, it is hard to quiet quit. You've got to rock up and you've got to do your job and you've got to put in the hours. But accounting professionals, fintech people, more entitled, shall we say, they have the option as to quiet quit or not.
Yeah, and it speaks to something again, which I'm kind of fascinated in this this idea of perceived stress versus actual stress. Like, do you actually have a stressful job, or are you making your rod through and back? You're not dealing with things properly. You're not using all the tools at your disposal. I look at what I do as a living, And I wouldn't say that I'm not at the coalface. I'm not out there saving people's lives. I'm not shimming up ladders and rescuing children from burning buildings, And whilst I don't want to say that what I do isn't important, I can go to bed at night and my life isn't in any danger. Unless by my own choosing, in terms of what I do.
There are fewer consequences of you quiet quitting perhaps than others, is what you're saying.
That's one there. And actually, sometimes when we have kind of not disagreements with staff, but we kind of do training with staff around why certain things are important, typically around communication with clients, which is, I know you speak this language all day, every day because you're a chartered accountant, but to an end user or a client, that language is scary and terrifying. You need to kind of just adjust that. I suppose one of the things we look at is like, you imagine you were ill and you went to a doctor and they didn't explain all the lingo they used to you. You left out of there frightened and scared. That's the kind of the translation you need to do there. And I think kind of what you said there about, I always think about it in medical terms, because to me that's the kind of the most consequence ridden kind of industry to be in or profession to be in. You get something wrong and someone's life's in danger.
Something's at stake.
Absolutely, something very important in stake, and not just for that person, but their wider network, family, all that kind of stuff. Is that you can't quietly quit that, because what you patient care and the rest of it, and it comes down to that passion and purpose. And I've got friends who are doctors, and if you've ever, well, we've all got friends who are medics. They don't go into it for the money. They're not doing it because they want to become a rich surgeon. They're doing it because they've got a passion for people and what they do. So it probably wouldn't, even though they're stressed and even though they're overworked and underpaid for what they do, they probably wouldn't quietly quit. They probably just quit and leave the profession altogether. So yeah, the sense of it's an interesting conversation about entitlement and about a privilege to be able to quietly quit, to be able to kind of there's all these jokes around COVID, wasn't there? People having these like mouse shifters on their desks to make it look like they're working. Like, you can't do that in lots of professions. You can't do that if you're a truck driver or an HGV driver. You can't do that. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion around company culture, around how you get buy-in from staff who maybe have checked out a little bit over COVID, and whether actually do you need everybody to be super engaged and like you being the biggest brand advocates and raving fans for your company, or can you run your company with people who will come in and do what they're meant to do and leave at the end of the day and not give it a second thought? And then actually, as long as you know that, that's fine. As long as you know what they're going to do, that contract is very clear. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting discussion.
And we talk about discretionary effort, which is what you do above and beyond what you're expected to do. And in a labor market where jobs are short and there is demand for roles, then you can hustle and build your career and accelerate what you're doing. But when there's a shortage of candidates and a shortage of talent, you can do the minimum and still get a job. You can still get promoted. You can still be retained despite not exhibiting any discretionary effort. So there is an incentive, if you like, because what are the consequences? They're not going to fire me. They can't afford to. There's nobody else out there.
Yeah. And it's, this labor market, it ebbs and flows, doesn't it? It goes a bit like the housing market. Sometimes it's a buyer's market, sometimes it's a seller's market. And we're at a point where it's an employee's market at the moment. Your negotiating power as an employee has potentially never been higher. It's hard to recruit talent in our profession at the moment, but that will shift and change in the next 5 years as more people come in, start training, move up, people become hungry, and we'll see that go cyclically. And then you have to look at Peter's principle. You've been promoted to the highest level of your incompetence, and where do you go from there? Because you can end up trapped because you can't get an equivalent salary or job elsewhere, and maybe you're not that happy doing that anymore. It's not giving you that purpose that you need to stay engaged in a job.
And Lucy, you pick out a piece that's online at Investopedia. We'll put the link in the show notes. And any takeaways for our listeners on what came out from you when you were reading that, just to wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, let me just remind myself.
It's got some interesting stats. saying that at least half of the American workforce are quiet quitting, which is quite phenomenal. Now, the British have been
Yeah.
described as idlers in the past, and recently by our Prime Minister as not working hard enough and being productive enough. So, yeah, some interesting stats. But yeah, the key takeaways for you from this piece.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there, really, in terms of the prevalence of it, that this phrase, what's I suppose horrifying as an employer, this phrase came out of nowhere, or soft quitting, they mentioned it's called there as well. This phrase came out of nowhere, what, a month ago, and suddenly, I mean, whether it's just it's the zeitgeist and we've named the thing we've kind of recognized has been happening for a while, but suddenly you see it on TikTok, you see people talking about it, you see all these kind of things about how to quiet quit and how to, and it's become almost a badge of honor in some places that I'm quietly quit, I'm checking out. And you do you. If that works for you and your employer's fine with it and you're doing that and you're fine with it, then who am I to criticize? But yeah, I think the prevalence of it is the shocking thing. And the number of people as well, I think there's a stat in there about the number of people who are thinking about leaving their jobs within the next year as well. That's a huge percentage of the workforce. Where are they going to go? Where are they shifting to? Are we going to see an uptick in people starting their own businesses? Yeah, I think it's just those stats are, as an employer, horrifying.
Yes. Well, we'll be talking about it more and more. It's definitely not going to go away. And just while we have you, Lucy, talk to us a little bit about Pronation. This is a new launch that you're getting into with Carl Reeder and Will Farnell. You're excited about this, aren't you?
I'm so excited about Pronation. So I've known Carl and Will for a very long time now. We've been friends for a while, and I'm super excited about it because we've all grown relatively large practices, all kind of 7-figure plus, in the same over the same kind of time period in 3 incredibly different ways. So we've all taken very different approaches to whether it's the way we offer the service, like I do with subscription, or whether it's niching, like Carl does with franchising, or whether there's M&A and acquisition stuff like Will does, or having that technology arm specifically with app advisory. We've all done it in super different ways, but our end result is kind of going in the same direction. And I find that I'm so excited to be able to work with 2 people who have approached a problem in a different way but come to a similar conclusion or result. And yeah, they make me feel quite stupid when I sit and talk with them. I feel like I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room.
That's very humble of you, but you do bring a certain something to the mix, because all 3 of you actually are not just accounting firm owners, successful accounting firm owners, but you are mentors and coaches, and you have your own following, your own community.
Yeah.
You're very active on social media. You want to be a force for good and affect the profession. And truthfully, there are people out there in your position, perhaps, that have ran firms and doing it, and they have their own little tribe. But this is much more powerful than that, because 3 heads are better than 1, right? You're not just following one guru or one way of doing things.
Absolutely. 3 is the magic number, Rob. Yeah, but 3 heads are better than 1. And I think I suppose my discomfort sometimes with coaching, even if someone was just to come to me and only want me to coach them, is I'm only giving my point of view, and I'm only giving my, with some of our parts, I'm only giving my set of experiences, my wealth of knowledge, whatever that might be. And then, I'm always very willing to think there's somebody who might know how to do something differently or better than me that might benefit somebody. So to have 3 different takes from 3 different people, I think is so valuable. And yeah, it's 3 for the price of 1, isn't it? You get 3 people who've been there and done it, and we don't always agree. That's the great thing. We don't always agree on how to do something, but from that you take that actually, even the I kind of shy away from the word guru, but even the gurus maybe can't agree on something, and that's maybe a good thing, because it shows there's lots of ways to do stuff.
Yeah, well, it's exciting. We're going to hear more about it in future shows, and there's going to be big launches on social media, in the press and everything else. So look out for that. Thank you, Lucy Cohen, for being on our Insights in Accounting show today, talking about quiet quitting. Thanks so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Rob.